But tonight we're here for Amy Greene, who was supposed to be only coming to our little tiny group, and then we thought, no, we can't keep Amy to ourselves. We've got to invite the public. She's too good to keep under wraps, so she graciously appeared to come and discuss the book with us tonight, Bloodroot. We do want this to be an informal kind of discussion, and as soon as I introduce Amy, I'll say a word or two about how we want to proceed.
And it's interesting the way that I came up with the title, because I was thinking about where my characters lived and what it would be called. I was trying to think of a name for the mountain, and I knew of the existence of Bloodroot. And when that came to me, I wanted to name it after something indigenous that would grow where they lived. And when the name Bloodroot and Bloodroot Mountain came to me, this story and the theme just kind of fell into place around that. And as far as it being a place that really exists, it's kind of this composite of the hollers and mountains around where I live, where I grew up in Whitesburg and moved a whole 10 minutes down the road to Russellville. But growing up there in that area, it's not any one place. It's kind of just my image of Appalachia and what I have in my mind and how I define home.
Which character do you identify with most?
I think people are really surprised when I answer this question, because I think people expect me to say Myra, and I do identify with Myra because of her wildness and her closeness to the land. I do feel that, and I spent a lot of my childhood outdoors, exploring the hills and woods around our house. But somehow the character that I identify with most is Johnny, and I couldn't help but put myself in him and to make him a writer. And it took a lot to get him right. There were hundreds of pages that didn't make it into the book of just writing Johnny and trying to get him right. And there are challenges, inherent challenges involved in being a writer, writing about a writer. I mean, it's difficult and it's hard to do right. But it felt almost against my will. I kind of I think I felt that empathy for him. I felt for him, and so he ended up being my favorite character. And the one that I put the most of myself into, even though I'm not a dark and violent person the way that he is. I'm real sweet, but I'm not like him.
Comments? All right, another question. Back to the men of the novel. You chose to have Johnny not go after Myra when she severely injured him. Would an abusive man in reality change so dramatically and even forgive Myra?
I feel like he didn't change dramatically. I feel that after many, many years and as an older man, I feel like there was a glimmer of hope for him. And I think that what I wanted to show with John was that in his sick and twisted way, he felt as if that he could love Myra and hurt her at the same time. That's what he believed. And I did want there to be a little redemption even for him in a very dark story. I do realize that it's a very dark and difficult story. It's not a happy story at all the time, but I did want there to be some light at the end.
Okay. Why do tradition and superstition exert such a great influence on the characters?
I think because they exert such an influence on me. I think it's been so much a part of my life growing up and all the things, as I was talking about earlier, all the stories that I heard. My mom had an aunt who would take off her warts by rubbing stones in a circle around each one and throwing the stones away. And that's just the kind of, and always grew up hearing about haints as if they were just, just real as could be. Someone called my mom and was like, "Well, we're moving. Our house is haunted. We're out of here." That's the life that I've lived, and so, and I think it's still part of our culture today, even though we are moving away from that a little bit. But I still think it's a part of our culture that goes all the way back to the 1700s when the settlers came over from Scotland and Ireland. And it's just very much a part of Appalachia, our life, our heritage. So I think it just naturally seeped into the story and became part of it.
Which came first, Amy, the idea for the plot or the characters?
Definitely the characters. I mean, it's a very character-driven story, and as I said before, I wasn't really sure what would happen with the story. I didn't know if a story, I knew when I started I wanted to see what would happen, and I knew that Myra would be the heart of the story. And I actually saved her for last. I kind of got to know her through the other characters whose lives she turned upside down. But when I finally did write about Myra, then the story just kind of fell into place. And so definitely the plot came second. And some people would probably argue that they can see it, But for me, it was important for it to be a character-driven rather than a plot-driven story. It's all about them, and they kind of dictated what happened in the story. And I let that happen and let them, kind of. I think by knowing your characters really well. You can let a story evolve that way by kind of anticipating what they would do or wouldn't do and what they would do next. So,
okay, and that might actually lead into this next question. You chose to tell the story through the voices of 6 characters in different time periods. Why did you choose this method of relating the story?
At first there were even more voices when I started out, and I felt like each voice was so important that when I started getting feedback about needing to, cut some of the voices or consolidate or make it a simpler story, it was really hard for me because I did feel like each voice had something to say and something to tell about Myra, who was at the center of this story. And originally, when I did write that first draft, I had it organized in a completely different way. I had each character telling their whole story from beginning to end.
And I think you've touched on this just a little bit, but how has this book been accepted and viewed above the Mason-Dixon line?
Yeah, that's something, as I was saying earlier, that I've been so gratified to see, when I did travel, was that people were able to appreciate the themes at the center of the story, regardless of the area. And I think people have also been very interested in Appalachia. And there was a concern if people would understand, or if I'm just writing about home and about the holler and in this wider world, would they be able to appreciate it? And they have been able to, thankfully. So
I think that's what we're always trying to teach our students, is that you need to use your own experiences to tap into some universal concern, and I think that obviously your book has hit that note very well.
And of course, it's nothing that you can plan or that you can try to make happen. It either does or it doesn't. And I think that with me, all of this has been a surprise because I didn't have an agenda at all when I started writing. And so it's, I was compelled to write, and the story was in me, to write. And I just, put pen to paper, and this is what happened. But I think if you set out to write a certain thing or write a certain way, or I don't know how it would work. I don't think it would have worked for me if I had thought I'm going to tell this kind of story and hope that it connects with other people. I think you have to really write something from the heart and for yourself first.
And then it's automatically universal.
And then it's automatically universal,
Yes.
absolutely.
Yeah.